Welcome to Humane Voices, the official podcast of Humane World for Animals. I'm Chad, and there's Carrie. What's up, Carrie?
Hey, everyone.
So today we've got one heck of a show. This is unbelievable, our two guests. So I'm just going to get right into it. We've got Mike Moser, who spent more than a decade in the fur industry as, oh my God, these are two huge titles, as a director in the International Fur Federation and then chief executive of the British Fur Trade Association. Two big titles. He was an executive. And after a change of heart, he's now a strong anti-fur advocate. We've also got Claire Bass, Senior Managing Director of Campaigns at Humane World for Animals UK. So tell me about when you first met. You were both pitted against each other on the debate stage. Is that right? On different sides of the fur issue, and you're debating each other, and that's how you first met. Is that right?
Yes. In fact, at the time, one of my mates, that's when I was with the British Fur Trade, and one of the tasks was to go out there and to try to defend it. It was always on defence, as you can imagine. And so in a number of situations, political and media situations, it was down to Claire and myself to represent either side of the debate. And the first time we met was on live TV. And I think, if I'm correct, it's the campaign when you're trying to highlight that a lot of the fake fur items actually contained real fur, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Mike. Yeah, it was a fake faux fur problem with real fur being sold as fake. And then I think the debate got wider, didn't it, to talk more broadly about the welfare issues with the fur trade. And yeah, you did a valiant job trying to defend the indefensible, but happily then had a reconsideration of your position.
What was the flavor of those debates like? Like, how was that? I mean, did you do multiple debates over time? Did you meet multiple times? And how did the sort of, you guys clearly have known each other a while now. How did it sort of start changing?
We met, I said TV, probably one of the more fertile situations for me anyway. We were in front of a group of peers and members of Parliament in the House of Lords. It was the All-Party Group for Animal Welfare, and I was invited along to defend the trade. And it was at that point, it's something that Claire presented which had a really profound effect and acted as a big catalyst for where I am today. But maybe I can touch on that a little bit later. But yeah, it was on radio, on TV, and various political situations. But the thing which I'm going to expand on a bit later on, the thing that really impressed me with Claire was both the way that she conducted the debate, the messages that she used, and the professionalism both of herself and the organisation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that it was easier for me, far from it. In many ways, it's much more difficult, because there was no flamboyance, there was no drama to the debate. Mm. And so I think it reached out to people far more effectively than maybe theatrics may have done. So but I've touched on some of those things a little bit later on.
Well, Claire, you sat down at the table, and I'm guessing you're like, I'm going to tear this guy apart.
Well, I mean, no, Mike is a lovely guy, as you'll find out during the course of this podcast. And so no, that wasn't the inclination. And I think because at Humane World, we're always looking to the evidence-based, and we, the fur trade doesn't really need any exaggeration. The facts speak for themselves. Yeah. So there was never any need to, use hyperbole or exaggeration to get our point across. Really, we just stated the facts, and I think Mike increasingly found it very difficult to counter them. But yeah, our debates were always very, very professional and good-natured, and we even went for coffee after one, didn't we, Mike? And had a chat about farming of other animals and parallels with the fur trade. And so for me it was important to understand where Mike was coming from and to get a dialogue going, and I'm very glad that we did that.
Well, your meeting sounds like a movie script, is what it sounds like. Let's work on that. Yeah, let's work on that. Welcome to the show, you guys. Thanks for that intro about how you met. Well, Claire, let's start big picture wise. For those who might not know in the audience here, what are some of the animal issues or animal welfare concerns that are top of mind in the fur industry? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So Well, first of all, I mean, happily, the fur trade globally has declined massively in recent years, but it's still causing suffering to around 20 million animals every single year, mostly foxes, mink, and raccoon dogs. And of those 20 million, a few million, maybe around 3 million, are trapped for their fur. That's happening in North America and Russia. And that happens with really horribly cruel leg hold traps where animals can be caught for days on end, unable to eat or seek shelter before the trapper comes back to kill them. And in some places, even drowning traps for animals like beavers are used. So there's horrifically inhumane trapping goes on. But the majority of fur now comes from animals who are farmed for their fur. So they're kept for their entire very short lives, only around 8 or 9 months, in barren metal wire cages, which are around about a meter squared, so barely bigger than the animal themselves. And unsurprisingly, in these conditions, they suffer horrendously, both physically and also mentally, and basically have really zero quality of life. And so
well, and you're talking firsthand experience, right? You've been on these farms in investigative situations. Is that right? You've seen this stuff.
Yeah, we've considered that investigations that expose the reality for animals on fur farms are really, really key weapon in our arsenal against the fur trade. And so I've personally visited probably a dozen or so fur farms in Finland, and the evidence that we've collected in those trips has been really crucial to convincing designers, retailers, politicians to step away from the cruelty of the fur trade. So yeah, these are horrible places. You kind of you hear them before anything else. So you hear this kind of like clattering of overgrown claws on the wire mesh floor because the animals are standing on wire mesh. So you hear this clattering, there's plaintive howls from the foxes, and then the smell hits you. So there's this acrid ammonia that's just hanging really dense in the air from the mounds of feces that is piled up under the cages. And then when we see the animals, it's really hard to witness. As I said, they're in these barren wire cages. It's kind of like asking a person to spend their entire life living in an elevator. Really, that's the kind of scale that we're talking about. They've got nothing compared to what they would have in the wild. And some of the animals just are broken. Some of them have just given up. They're slumped in a corner, inert. Some of them are pacing or rocking, stereotypical behaviors indicative of their distress. And some of them are frantic or fearful, but they're all abnormal and they're all clearly suffering. And yeah, just compared to their lives in the wild, these are animals that should be roaming over, 10, 20 kilometers a day. They should be hunting, digging, swimming, interacting with other animals. And then on fur farms, they're just units of production.
Wow.
They're like ghosts of the animals they should be.
Just out of curiosity, has there been any change over the years in the kinds of species that the fur industry uses? Like, are there trends in the animals that the industry selects? I mean, you mentioned foxes, and
I don't think it's changed dramatically over the years. Mink is just easier to farm because you can get more mink in small cages.
Okay.
And I can only endorse what Claire's just described as the impacts on the farms. It's something which, at the beginning, I kind of convinced myself. When I've read a lot of times before I joined the industry, before I accepted it, I thought, well, look, I'm quite intrigued. I've had the scientific background, and I was intrigued by an objective definition and measurement of welfare. So I joined pretty much as I saw it as like a communications, an exciting, unusual communications opportunity. Well, look, there's another side to the industry which isn't well known, and that is, well, scientists say you can have substantial or measurable or acceptable welfare. And I looked at the regulations. But very quickly, when you actually look at a farm, when you go on a farm and you start to see these animals caged, something, fairly soon kicked into me, and it was a common sense factor.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I'd like to say to people today is, if the science says that it's okay to imprison a fox that is about the size, let's say, of a spaniel, breed of spaniel, in a cage that's what, 0.8 of a meter square.
Right.
Then
About
the
the size of a
science,
spaniel.
then
No
the
bigger.
science, then the science is clearly wrong. And
Mhm.
I'm more than happy to sit here with any welfare scientist that wants to go through, and I can look at, I know, I can understand the science, but it simply doesn't stack up to what the vast, vast majority of people know. You can't do it without the animals suffering. And when you sit for yourself on these farms, it's overwhelming.
Mhm.
It's absolutely overwhelming.
But Mike, was there a particular moment for you that you can call on that you said, okay, I need to think about this, my time in this industry?
Chad, there were two aspects to that. The answer to that, there was a very slow realization that something wasn't right. The regulations, which by the way have been in force for so long, they're really outdated. In Europe, for example, the welfare regulations as regards fur farming are 26 years old. They haven't changed. And welfare science, our understanding of animal sentiency, has progressed so much since then, yet these regulations haven't. And guess what? Neither has farming methodology. Still the same case. The industry had many, many opportunities to improve animal welfare, but it shunned them. It never has, not one time, improved the welfare of fur animals for one very simple reason, that the fur farming business model is absolutely predicated on the need to have these small, intensive farming, small cages. So there's this long drawn out, if you like, realization something's wrong. But also on one of the debates with Claire, she used this slide, which has had such an impact on me. And she was trying to, I'm sorry, Claire, I'm speaking over there, but this was the impact. She showed a slide that had 6 animals on it. And if I remember rightly, it was a cat and a dog, and I think it was a seal, and a mink and a fox and a raccoon dog. And Claire posed the question, so what's the difference between these animals? Well, you can harvest these 3 for fur, but you can't those 3. And I thought about that, and I said to myself, hang on a minute, I'm trying to explain and condone, yes, you can. It's okay to farm mink. It's okay. Well, hold on a minute. How can that be correct? Why should there be a difference? Why should those species be made to suffer, but it's illegal to farm those animals? And that inconsistency had a big impact on me, a major impact. But also specifically, I'd seen a fox on a farm, and there were thousands of foxes on this farm, but one particular fox was in a cage, and I was looking at it. Its feet were curled up underneath because it couldn't move, and its head was down. And when I looked to approach the cage, it looked up at me, and it had such abject misery on its face. And more than anything that upset me was it was resigned to its fate. It looked at me, and it was a broken animal. And I came home that night, and I was sitting in my kitchen, and my pet dog, bless his heart, he's passed on from now. He was a great old lab called Barney, and he was looking at me, and I saw that fox. I saw the same look, and I thought, that's not right. I'm defending it's okay to kill that fox, but I wouldn't dare let anybody come near my Barney.
Wow.
And the very next day, I went in and I resigned.
Wow.
That's amazing. Good Lord.
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah, Mike, it sounds like you're saying, and it like that the very model that the fur industry as a whole uses, that the economics of it make it inherently cruel because of the volume and size. Is that correct? Like there's no way that you could have, quote, humane fur farming and actually have it be, I mean, we could argue about whether there's a possibility of ever having humane slaughter, but the idea of having any sort of humane, more improved animal welfare standards, it sounds like it's inherently impossible with what the fur industry is trying to do financially.
In my experience, absolutely. Those two things are completely incompatible.
Yeah.
Whilst any animal is caged and cannot freely exhibit its natural behaviours, it's cruel. There is no argument to this. Claire explained what you would see these animals do in the wild. How can anybody sensibly say it's okay to cage them for their entire lives? Even if you were to forget for one moment why you're doing that, there is systemic cruelty in the fur farming business methodology that cannot ever be stopped whilst those animals are caged.
And I think just to add to that, Mike, that, you know, some people ask, well, why couldn't the fur industry move to sort of extensive farming, if you like? You know, we see that with other other livestock farming, that you can have intensive models, extensive models for animals like chickens and pigs, for example. So why couldn't the fur trade do that? But if you look at countries like Germany, where they introduced regulations to demand higher standards, so kind of a larger pen size, to have substrate that the animals could dig in, like soil on the floor, swimming water for mink. The industry went out of business very, very quickly because, as Mike said earlier, their entire economic model is built on battery farming, and they don't have the space or the economic bandwidth to create higher extensive conditions to keep the animals in. It's just impossible. And then, as Mike said as well, there's the ethics of it. You know, why are we killing animals just for their fur in the 21st century at all? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, the industry's been, from everything I've seen, dropping quite a bit over the past decade. I think we mentioned it earlier briefly, Claire. It looks like 140 million in animals killed in 2014 to roughly 20 million a couple of years ago. So the numbers have dropped. We're still killing a lot of animals for fur. 20 million is nothing to sneeze at. But what's been responsible, do you think, Claire, for that huge shift?
Yeah, it's a precipitous decline, which we're obviously delighted by. And the industry really is at a tipping point of pretty much no return, I think. There's a few things that I think have contributed to it. Certainly investigations like the ones we've done have put the suffering, front and center to designers, to retailers, to politicians. You don't need to be a vet or welfare scientist.
And the public, really.
And the public, absolutely, who are driving demand at the end of the day, who don't want to buy products of cruelty. But I think over the last 20 years in particular, we've seen more and more companies developing corporate social responsibility plans and strategies. And they look at the evidence that we have of, how fur is produced, and they see that there's no other option, if they want to be a responsible retailer, than to turn their back on fur. And that chimes with falling consumer demand as well. And so now, certainly in Europe and North America, animal fur has very low sort of social acceptability, and that's been further exacerbated in a sort of a cycle of self-perpetuating cycle where the designers respond to public demand falling, and then and it carries on. So when the designers of the kind of from around 2015 onwards, I think it was 2017 actually, when Gucci dropped fur, that was a real shift. Because loads of designers followed suit.
Interesting. So that was maybe one of the tipping points, was Gucci deciding.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, from the 90s and early 2000s, there were brands like Tommy Hilfiger and Ralph Lauren who were the kind of early adopters of fur-free policies. Then Hugo Boss, Armani were pretty early on as well. But in 2017, Gucci really changed the game. And then over the last 5 years, we've seen over 50 big international designers and brands drop fur, including those who used to have fur as a major part of their kind of brand identity. So brands like Canada Goose, Prada, brands that even 5 years ago, we would have thought they're going to be a really difficult, nut to crack. They're going to hang on to fur, for a long time. They've just got, it's been a domino run, basically. And we've also seen fashion weeks, London Fashion Week dropping fur, Copenhagen Fashion Week going fur-free. So it all becomes like a self-perpetuating, effect and cycle. COVID-19 had a big effect as well on the fur trade. So 20 million or so mink were killed or culled ordered to be culled by the Danish government when there were outbreaks of COVID-19. So for public health reasons, the fur trade took a major hit then as well.
And it's not even just COVID-19. I thought, the zoonotic diseases that we hear about with these intensive fur farming stuff, has that come into play as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the since COVID-19, there's been a lot more focus and research on the evidence that strongly shows that the conditions on fur farms. So you've got thousands of animals all in cramped conditions. You've got poor hygiene, huge amounts of stress, low genetic diversity. These are perfect conditions for viruses to spread and also to mutate. And mink actually are particularly problematic because they act as a like an intermediary species. So we know that certain coronaviruses, for example, come from bats. They can't be passed directly to humans, but they can via an intermediary species. And mink are a really good vector species to pass these illnesses on. Hundreds of outbreaks of COVID-19 and also avian flu on fur farms. And there was a paper published last year where they identified, I think it was about 40 high-risk viruses on Chinese fur farms, including, I think it was about 15 novel viruses as well, new bat coronaviruses, all of these warning signs that, we're like, are we sleepwalking into the next pandemic just to produce a bobble hat? It's totally insane. And the virologists have said, who are looking at kind of where might the next pandemic come from, they have specifically said about the fur trade, it is a roll of the dice. We are playing, we're playing Russian roulette here, just what to produce some, a furry trim on a coat. These places are a ticking time bomb for pandemic disease risk. And if not for the animals' sake, we want them to ban fur farming because of the animal welfare problems. But if governments don't care about animal welfare, they should care about public health, and the fur trade is terrible for that.
There's the list of grievances against the fur trade are long. Good Lord.
Seriously,
really, yeah.
I mean, Mike, there's so much suffering. You've seen it. Claire has seen it over the years with investigative footage and everything else. But there's still a reluctance. There's still somebody, the heads of the fur trade, I guess, are sticking to their guns. They want to keep going. Why is that? What's going on?
That's a very, very good question. Why do they?
Carrie, did you hear that? I asked a good question.
I'm marking down.
If the question is why do you carry on long past a sell-by date, both practically and metaphorically? The industry is known for such a long time that it's inevitable that it is going to come to an end. I don't think anybody that works in the fur trade has any misty-eyed hope that it's going to continue. They know, and it's a case of how long can we hang on. I think that partly it's intransigence. It's we won't change because this is the nature of our business, and there's this inextricable link between the personality of the trade, if it was a person, and its history. It hasn't changed very much. The people who work within it haven't changed very much. And I think it's a mixture of arrogance. We won't change, like a victim mentality. I'm not going to change. And the more you tell me, I think there's a fear of change. There's the cost of change. We've spoken about this, as regards to the investments that will be required to make any changes. Imagine a farm that has 30,000 cages, and if all of a sudden they were told you've got to change those, just that investment alone. I just think also that they realise that they've had the heyday financially. Back in roughly 2014, 2015, mink prices were so high, the fur farmers were literally minting money.
Wow.
And that was a time when they could have made change, but they didn't want to. And now they would say, we simply don't have the money to make the changes. So I think it's a mixture of things. And you can't produce the fur on the volumes that's required for them to make profit other than continuing the status quo. And it's not going to change. It's the only way to stop it is to completely ban fur farming.
Wow.
Claire, we were talking earlier about the role of the major sort of fashion houses in sort of setting the tone and how when they made decisions to step away from fur, what an effect that had and sort of a cascading effect. I'm curious to hear about what's the role of the consumer in this work and how does it sort of cascade up to the fashion houses and influence those decisions, and what can consumers and advocates do to sort of move the needle on this?
Yeah, I mean, consumer power is everything, isn't it? Really, that's why the fur trade exists, is because there is demand, or has been demand. And I think what we've seen in recent years, in particular, that Gen Z consumers, in particular, are proving to be very much more mindful about the environmental impact and climate impact of their buying choices, and that's perhaps a dynamic that's worth touching on with respect to the fur trade, because the fur industry likes to position itself as kind of green, or it's a natural product or sustainable, and actually the reality is pretty much the complete opposite. So we've done studies and we've commissioned experts to look at fur production set against other materials, and found that any way you look at it, fur production is more environmentally harmful than producing other materials, including actually acrylics, although we're not here to defend faux fur, but it is definitely more environmentally damaging. And I think it's interesting to consider the fact that fur farming is all about keeping carnivorous animals, so they need to be fed other animals. So you've got to feed your foxes, chicken or fish or whatever. So it's a environmentally hugely irresponsible production system from a climate and environment perspective. And people might be aware, for example, that producing beef is known to be bad for the climate, right? Most people might have a sense of that. But actually, we found that producing a kilogram of mink fur produces 7 times the greenhouse gas emissions of a kilogram of beef.
Wow.
So, again, if you're not minded to stop fur farming for animal welfare reasons or public health reasons, then, environment and climate is another really strong reason to stop doing this. And so Gen Z consumers really want to know, what the footprint of their buying choices is and what the damage they might be doing. And so that a lot of them are stepping away from fur for that reason as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and to answer your question, Carrie, about, what can people do? I mean, the most important thing obviously is to make sure that you never buy fur. And as we touched on earlier, even people who are intending to buy faux fur, fake fur, can accidentally find that they're buying real fur, because life is so cheap on fur farms that real fur can be produced as cheaply as acrylic fur and then sold as fake fur. So we have a few simple checks that people can use to tell the difference between real and fake fur. So that's very important. And then I guess the other thing to do is check out, keep an eye on our fur pages on our website, humaneworld.org/fur free. And that has all the information about the campaigns we're running in different parts of the world to get bans on fur farming or bans on fur sales, and to convince companies to go fur free as well. And there's petitions there that people can sign too.
Fantastic. Oh, that sounds great. Mike, let's end with you. What gives you hope right now about the industry? We've talked about the decline, but there's still more work to do. What are you optimistic about?
I think it's absolutely clear that the zeitgeist of today is against fur.
Right.
And I wish fervently that continues. I would like our political leaders to take courage and to show leadership in listening to what survey after survey, whether it's in North America, across Europe, wherever you wish to look, the vast majority of people saying there is no place for fur. So I would like to see our political leadership take the courage and actually start to implement bans. So what gives me hope is that as each year goes by and younger people become more into the consumer, to exert their buying power, fur is going to be that wadi in the desert, that ephemeral little puddle that shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And one day, the last drop will evaporate, and we'll look back and we'll say, did we really used to kill animals for their fur to wear it? And we'll look back with as much incredulity I can't get that word out at the moment. As much suspicion, there we go, as we do about some other topics. So that's my hope, Chad. And yeah, hope that happens soon. Incredulity. That's what I was looking for. Incredulity.
Claire and Mike, thank you guys so much for all this great information. Really appreciate it. And that's it for us. We'll see you next time on Humane Voices.